Welcome to episode 47 of Enhancing the Human Experience. This episode is sponsored by The Alchemy of Despair, 17 practical ways to transform sadness and suffering into happiness and joy. Let's be honest, the human experience it can be a roller coaster, can't it? Sometimes highs, sometimes lows. But what we know is that you can't attract great experiences into your life if you don't feel good. Feeling is our point of attraction. This is the message that Abraham Hicks talks about, the message that Neville Goddard talks about. Everyone says that feeling really is the secret. How you feel in the present moment right now is actually paving a path to the experiences and circumstances that are going to come to you. It's super vital to feel good right now for no reason, right? For only the reason that you want great experiences. Well, that's what this book is all about. 17 practical ways to actually do that, right? To pull yourself out of the dumps, so to speak, and cut that downward spiral that we find ourselves in from time to time and start turning back toward our true nature, our joyous nature, our happy nature. And when we do that, we will naturally start to attract better experiences into our lives. So that book is available in Amazon and coming soon in paperback. Go check it out. All right, so let's get into the show here. Let me give you the backstory on Shannon Hernandez, aka the Shan Man, and why I wanted to interview him for the podcast. So I first discovered him a while back, and he through some videos that he does, through his business that he does on YouTube and his website, which is coaching entrepreneurs and business people on how to make awesome podcasts so they can share their message with their clients and get a reaction, get them to follow them and listen to them. And so I found his stuff on YouTube, super helpful, super genuine, really cares, and also really knows his stuff. I mean, he is a 17-year radio veteran, 16 of those years with Arizona rock station KUPD 98. And of course, he does a lot of sound stuff. He does all these podcast information and sound information and speaking, and he knows his stuff. He's super helpful. And I'm going to put links to his YouTube and social media and also his podcast. We'll talk about that in a moment on the blog post at gmarkphillips.com. Go check him out. I mean, this guy, he's been on my short list of people to interview for quite some time, and he's doing a lot of amazing things. We'll talk about that in the podcast. But he's interviewed some amazing people on his own podcast, which is titled Be the Experience. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to reach out to him, is because he has some interesting stuff going on here, and he talks about that in the interview. So this interview, I really enjoyed it, and I think you're going to as well. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Okay, so Shannon, I introduced who you were and kind of told my audience about you and how I came to find you on the internet. But I'm really curious to hear your, history and story up until this point.
Yeah, man, gosh, where should I start? Well, I guess from the moment when, let's just say, starting from radio, and that's really where I have jumped into the podcasting space, because this is a real big hot topic in the radio world right now, radio industry, because people are trying to figure out how podcasting is going to fit into their business model. And so, 15 years ago, well, more than 15 years ago, about 18 years ago, I had made this decision that I was going to get in radio. I'd always wanted to be in radio since junior high school. And there's a radio station here in the Phoenix, Arizona area that has always been huge in the current station that I work for. And that was the dream. That was like, I got to work for 98 KUPD. That's what I've got to do. And when I was in college, I remember I was working at a sorority hall as a front desk assistant, and I just decided I needed to make the jump. I needed to pull the trigger and try to get in on radio and see if I could get on at KUPD. And I ended up applying to the sister station for KUPD, and I got hired on there. I was there for about a year, and then I got fired in the way radio knows how to do it, and I was discouraged. I got down on myself. And but I didn't let that keep me from continuing on and continuing to move forward. And I applied to KUPD, and I remember it was a rainy day. I had just gotten back from another interview at a country radio station, and the interview went terribly. I came home, I cried because I thought, this is my last chance of ever being in radio. I'm probably never going to get in at KUPD ever again, or ever at all. And so I remember lying on my bed, and I got a call from my promotions director back then. And I had applied for a promotions position and an on-air position at the same time. And the promotions director said, we want to bring you on, but you're going to be working for the sports station. That's the sister station. And, that's how you're going to help. And I said, well, is there any way that I will be able to help for KUPD? He's like, yeah, we'll figure out how to get you to help for KUPD. Hung up with him. And then I would say like 4 hours later, I got a call from my program director back then. He hired me on. And he said, we need you to do weekends. And the two didn't even know that they had both hired me. I had just gotten hired.
In different departments or different?
It was in different departments. Okay. So it was a twist of fate. And I think that was universal intelligence telling me that I belonged at KUPD. Now, fast forward 18 years later, I started making YouTube videos I started about 6 months ago on YouTube, and they were all designed to help podcasters get their podcast up and running with a specific intention to turn your podcast from something that is, a hobby into a thriving business. And I believe that you can do something like a podcast that is a thriving business. So I started putting out videos, and this is how you came across me on YouTube.
Super helpful, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, no, not a problem. That's the whole point, is to make it helpful for the common podcaster to launch their podcast. And one thing that I have learned in this process, because let me back up real quick. Starting this process has been very cathartic, been very humbling for me. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm starting an online business, and here I am at 41, and who starts a business all over from scratch at 41, and you can get discouraged at times. And I have been to conferences, I have been coached, I have taken classes, I have done everything in my power to understand how to start a business online. And one day I just said, you know what? I'm going to commit to putting a video out every week with helpful tips to podcasters, with the intention, knowing later on down the line that I'm going to run out of things that talk about with podcasting. I think, I don't know yet, but it's going to happen, I think. And what I have learned now, if we were to fast forward, is I've learned that people have zero confidence in themselves when it comes to launching a podcast because they hate how their voice sounds. They don't feel they have the confidence to get in front of the microphone. They feel they sound too nasally, or they have a southern drawl. They have all these insecurities about themselves. And what they don't realize is that their insecurities are the most charming part about them.
I like that.
So really, it was, teaching people how to be more confident is something that is a part of podcasting. We can get the technical parts down completely. We can look up YouTube videos. We can download guides. We can buy Podcasting for Dummies. We can do take a number of actions to become a podcaster. But when it comes down to it, no one's really teaching the confidence part. And there are coaches out there that teach business owners how to have more confidence, but this is kind of a universal thing. What did it take to pull the trigger to start the podcast? Well, really, it was just about being in your own way. And so that's kind of the path that I've taken from 18 years ago all the way up until now. And in between there's been a lot of personal development that I have had to go through, starting with, exercise, starting with nutrition. And I've been told in the past by people who have gone down the same path that I'm going down right now, is that those were the key elements for the success of who they became and who they are
Oh,
now.
like those fundamentals.
And I figured those fundamental teachings of nutrition, diet, exercise, and then personal development over the course of time. And so I really took it upon myself within the past 2 years to really focus on myself, and learning to really give more to myself and take care of myself, because you can't pour from an empty cup if you're willing to give back into the communities, such as what I have done with my podcast or with my YouTube channel.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I think your story is similar to what a lot of people are finding. They kind of had to like tear down and rebuild, quote unquote, the right way to do their work in the world, like you just mentioned.
Right. It's a matter of, I think what happens to people is that they see the glitz and the glamour of things like entrepreneurship, the idea of entrepreneurship, or starting something. It doesn't have to be entrepreneurship, but ultimately at the end of the day, if you're starting something that you want to, where you want to make a difference, you've got an entrepreneurial spirit. And when you see guys like Gary Vaynerchuk online, you see all these online marketers. You don't have to be an online marketer. Maybe it's a radio host. Maybe it's an athlete. What most people don't understand is that those people who became successful worked at it day in and day out without fail. They woke up thinking about it. They got out of bed. They started forming these daily habits. And this is something that I'm really big on when it comes to coaching podcasters, is that what you're creating as far as podcasts are concerned are all based around personal habits. It's not necessarily the idea of podcasting. These are personal habits, good habits that will affect your podcasting. And I believe that you have to tear yourself down. You can see the glitz and the glamour, like I said, but what ends up happening is that you're going to try, and you're going to realize that you haven't put in the work that comes with creating something and building something from your soul. And if you don't build that, you'd have zero appreciation if you don't realize that you've spent the money on all these services, that you've spent the time going to the gym, that you spent the time savoring a meal, basically just living life. If you haven't done those things, how can you expect to find, I shouldn't say success, because success is an ongoing thing to me. It's always going. So I have more failures than success. And to me, failing is success. So yeah, that's a very common thing that you're going to hear from a lot of people, but there's so much truth in it, because you discover parts of yourself that you didn't realize had even existed. You're unearthing the true nature of who you are.
But I think a lot of people give lip service to that. You're gonna fail. But I think myself included, we dismiss it and say, okay, yeah. Let me just get on to the big success, right?
Right. It's just they want to go from 0 to 100, not realizing that in order to get to from 0 to 100, that you actually have to start out slow, and it just didn't happen from 0 to 100. There's a million people out there in the online space as entrepreneurs who say, lose 10 pounds or lose 20 pounds in 3 days, or, that just doesn't exist unless you're starving yourself. These are just uncommon, tales of people saying that you can lose 20 pounds in 4 days. If you cleanse yourself and you're like probably not eating, that's probably something that that's going to happen. You're going to lose that amount of weight. But what a lot of these business owners and marketers and athletes and coaches and health coaches, what they're not saying, and I believe it's a poor practice, is that you can lose or you can gain something, but there's going to be a sacrifice, and you're going to have to tear back down, because just like a car, just like growing up, just like drinking a glass of water, you have to start slow in order to consume or to experience what you are set out to do. The car metaphor is something that I try to explain to people every time, is that you can't go from 0 to 100 without having to step on the gas, because even when you step on the gas and go to 100, the car still has to rev up to 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour. And it starts out slow until it builds momentum and it reaches 100 miles an hour. So to tell that to someone, to explain that to someone and say, look, you're not going to be at 100 right away. And if you are, it's going to crash because you haven't done the steps.
So you find yourself being doing a lot more personal development coaching when you're coaching your podcast clients. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, because if they don't have themselves in check, how can I expect them to get on the podcast and start divulging or dishing out advice that they don't even practice? It's just not fair. It's not fair to the listener.
Yeah. I really like that. So that's really interesting insight. So your podcasting business where you help podcasters be more successful. How long have you been doing that?
Honestly, Mark, I've been on and off helping people for probably 5 years. It wasn't until this year that I started to take it seriously. Actually, if you could say fiscal year starting back in June of 2017, that's when I started taking it seriously. And if you just were to take it back even further than that, I couldn't say, how can I teach people how to podcast if I didn't have a podcast of my own? And so I took it upon myself last January to say, okay, I'm going to really think through this process and build a podcast that for me works for me. It's not something that has to deal with something that's weekly. It doesn't have to deal with something that is done daily. It is something that is done for me. And I know that with my schedule and who I help, that a seasonal podcast works more for me, because I believe that if the content is rich enough, people go back and they listen to it. And it's something that I have done over the course of the last couple of years when it comes to watching YouTube videos that are motivational or listening to audiobooks that are motivational. I go back and I listen to them and I try to consume and absorb what they meant by whatever they were talking about at that moment.
Yeah, well, I think that's a common theme. I know for myself, that's the same thing. You can listen to a guru or an expert say something one year and listen to it a year later and get a different level of understanding.
Yeah, and I think that is what is most important when it comes down to developing yourself, because you can listen to the expert or the guru or whoever it may be, someone who's wildly successful and has found success in that. And it takes on a whole new meaning from day one when you listen and you say, wow, that's inspiring, versus day 233 when you listen to the same thing and something all of a sudden it just clicks. You're just like, wow, I didn't understand that. For me, my favorites to listen to are Les Brown and Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn coaching Tony Robbins, and then Tony Robbins, of course, affecting equally as many millions of people out there who are looking to live this enriched life. And there's so much wisdom in all of those teachings that you can take pieces of it and work that into your life and work on that part of your life until you can, I wouldn't say perfect it, but have it down to where you know yourself the best, and then work on the next part of your life.
Yeah. So would you say that listening to those folks, the Robbins and the Les Browns, has that been a common theme throughout your life? Or was there a point when you kind of dug deep and went to those guys and started devouring their information?
I've never been like that person ever. In fact, I was a wildly cynical person when I was growing up. Yeah. And I guess everyone has a bit of cynicism in their life. I still experience it every now and again, but I think what is important is that when I become cynical, I catch myself. And I think the awareness and the self-awareness of being cynical is something that is different. It's different than who I was before, because before, if I was cynical, I was just being cynical. I wasn't catching myself. I wasn't saying, So I think that's just a natural part of being a human, is that you can be cynical and you can deconstruct thoughts, and you can judge other people. And I think that's just a part of being human, but being able to catch that and being able to say, oh, how can I judge, or how can I judge anyone because I'm not even doing that? And so I can't honestly sit there and say someone, I can't judge someone without saying, well, I mean, they're doing it, but I can't say that I can do any better because I'm not doing it. You have to put things in perspective. And so not focusing on what other people are doing, I think, is a big key for me. You have to focus on your own game, because at the end of the day, when you look at your life and you look at how you live every day, are you scrambling around to get $20 to patch a hole in your tire because you don't want to go out and hustle and get the job? Or are you someone who can sit there and say, like, hey man, I took a calculated risk and I spent my last $20 that helped invest back into something that I was looking to do? So being aware and conscious of your decisions was that to me was the biggest factor. And I think that was all rooted in diet and exercise, because I believe those are the gateway drug. That's the gateway drug to finding discipline every day and developing yourself every day to having a better life within yourself, to having a better family life, whether you have a wife and children, leading a better life with your friends, and knowing when your time is valuable, or knowing how your time is valuable, and how you're utilizing your time and giving it to other people. Something that I just started implementing in the past, I would say month. Well, I wouldn't say month or two, but it's something that has been happening for, I would say, like maybe the last 5 months. I would schedule up meetings with these people who wanted to pick my brain, and we would schedule something out. And then, of course, there was always this magical emergency that happened.
Oh, on their end, or just
on their end? Because me, I'm committed. I'm committed to. Yeah, I'm committed to what I'm doing. If I don't really want to go to a meeting, I'll still go to the meeting if I don't want to go to the meeting. But I started implementing. Hey, if you want to pick my brain, now it's going to cost you, because that takes time.
Time is money. It's our most valuable resource. Good point.
Right. So I've started to implement prices on time you want to pick with, if you want to pick my brain. You can't write a check when we sit there and hope that you're there. You pay for the time immediately, and then I will be there. If I can't make it, you get a refund. But other than that, I will be there because I commit to just about everything.
Sure. And so you've kind of found that you've had to implement that because a lot of other people aren't committing at your level. No.
So that's a good point that you make. I'm at a different level than they are.
Yeah.
They may be making more money than I am, and I really don't care if they make more money than I am. Like I said before, this game is about you. It's not about focusing on other people. It's about you. It's about whether you can pay your bills. And I shouldn't say it like that, like whether you pay your bills, but you're focusing on the success of your life. You're focusing on the moment of your life. Can I get new furniture for my house? Should I buy a new desk? Should I take my children to Disneyland for a holiday excursion? These are, you're playing the game for your life, not for everyone else.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting, especially since you brought up, the Gary Vaynerchuk's and the people that we all see. I've found that in my own experience too, like you mentioned, that your real success is going to be when you tune that out to a high degree and focus on, doing you and being you.
Yeah, it's so funny because you hear you just got to do you, but I don't think people understand the do you.
Yeah,
methodology.
Don't really. I think part of the reason they don't understand it is because no one knows. Most people don't know themselves. They're so oriented out there. They're like, who the heck am I, right?
Yeah, people are just so plugged in. It's like the Matrix. They're just plugged into something every day without understanding or knowing or being open to knowing that the world around them is far more rich than what they ever imagined. If you go on my Instagram, I know you and I are Instagram friends, but if you go on my Instagram, anyone can look at my Instagram. I don't care. I don't hide anything. And you see that I try to make time to get out into nature and to breathe the air and to soak in what is around me, because there's this thought process that it's not morbid by any means, but I just think of it as like, look, I'm 41 years old. I lived 40 years on this life. And to me, I think about it and I go, God, it went by so fast. And what are the next 40 years of my life going to be? Are they going to be spent in front of the TV, in front of YouTube, Hulu, Netflix? What is it going to be? Am I just going to be living life on automatic, or am I going to live with purpose or intention? Am I going to live on purpose? And that was a defining moment when, I guess the catalyst for me was when I was overweight, I was unhealthy. And it's oddly enough, because I saw a video yesterday from the YouTube account Life Noggin, and it talked about what would happen to your body if you didn't eat fruits or vegetables.
Oh, really?
And that was me.
Scary.
Yeah. And that was, yeah. And all the things that they talked about in that video was exactly what was happening to me. My body started falling apart and I was sick all of the time. And once I started to accept the idea of like eating something as simple as vegetables and being open to the idea that this will help my body, this will help me, that's when other areas of my life started opening up and my mind started opening up. And I started becoming more open to receiving the good versus receiving the bad. So whatever habit you have every day could be, I get home from work and then I turn the TV on and then I sit there with a glass of wine until 10 o'clock at night and I'm buzzed. Well, then that's your habit.
Yeah.
That's your habit. And what you will receive later down the line is exactly what you're putting into it. So it's really kind of like what, I've said it for years, and then it wasn't until I listened to Jim Rohn that it was confirmed to me. I used to always say, you reap what you harvest, basically. And I used to tell that to, coworkers or anyone in the radio industry that, if you want to build an audience that is into you, what you're putting out there into that audience is what you're going to get back. So if you're a complete arrogant jerk on the radio, that's the type of people that you're going to get back at you. But if you're genuine and you're you, those are the type of people that are going to gravitate toward you. So all these things that I talk about, I know it seems kind of like I'm bouncing off the walls with different topics, but really when it comes down to it, it always comes back to the one key element of like just doing it for myself, because I'd rather just do it for myself and know that success doesn't have a number. Success doesn't have a status. Success is really more about what I find successful. If I make, $10,000 this year, I'm successful. If I got hired on at a satellite radio station, I may be successful. That may be success for me. Or maybe for me, success is raising 3 children. That is success. So success is different for everyone.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a very good point, and I'm glad you said that. It does seem like that, like you mentioned, when we're so plugged in and tuned in and watching everyone else, and we don't turn within and see what we want to do and what we want to offer to the world and what we can provide, we lose out. We leave all that on the table, and that's where I think the real gold mine is. So I love the fact that you're doing that. Is like, bringing yourself and letting yourself be expressed through your podcast and your work. I think that's where all the value for any of us lies.
Yeah. I saw something on Instagram, or it could have been Instagram or Facebook the other day, and it just talked about how, typically when it comes down to like business owners, small business owners, they're trying to make this impact with their product, or their service. And they're not being true to themselves. And the saying was something like, it says something along the lines of like, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, solve the problem that people are experiencing.
Oh yeah. Maybe Seth Godin, he talks about that a lot.
Yeah, it was probably a Seth Godin quote, I'm pretty sure, and it was probably paraphrased equally, but I've heard Seth talk about that. But you're just solving problems throughout the day, because how many times do you come up and someone says, "Oh, I'd love to do that. How do you do that?" Well, those are the people who you stay away from. Like, how do you do that? Oh, well, you got sure. And that's when I say, well, you're going to have to book time with
right. You can't just give them a little download and have them be up to speed, right?
Right. And typically, you'll know, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure that your audience is filled with people who are looking to step their game up one step at a time and jump into the entrepreneurial space or some type of venture that they're looking to do. But at the end of the day, when, you'll know the people who are serious versus the people who are just like, oh, I'm kind of half invested. A great example of this has been a coworker of mine, and he wants to start a podcast, and he's opted in and gotten my checklists and all that. And he has purchased, other checklists, and he's purchased photo courses, and he's like, hey, I will pay you for time. Well, I don't know if he said that, but sure. He's like, I'm serious. I'm very serious about learning from you. And you can separate out those people who are serious versus the ones who aren't serious. And the ones who are serious are the ones who will take it to the next level and discover themselves, because you'll see them shedding that skin and growing into someone new.
Right. And I'm sure you found this in your own experience. It seems like the ones that are going to be receptive to what you're teaching and actually do the stuff are the ones that do their homework and do the stuff when you're not with them, right?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because, I get hit up at least 2 or 3 times a week now since I've been putting out YouTube videos. And I was hit up just recently by someone who wanted me to mentor them. And as much as I would love to mentor them and sit there and talk with them on a daily basis, I personally just don't really have the time. And it doesn't mean that I won't make the time, but part of that is also intentional, because I want to see really how serious they are. I want to see how far are they going to take it. Are they willing to continue to bug me? And I'm not saying go out and bug me, but how serious are you? Are you being genuine in your request for me to mentor you? If you show me that you have genuine interest, if you show me that you've taken the steps, if you show me that you have done it yourself, but you're missing that one key piece, I'll probably help you out.
Well, yeah, and that's what I hear, from people who have gotten mentorships from big name people. They, eventually the people see how invested they are. Because I think that's kind of what you're saying is you don't want to invest your time in something that isn't going to be, benefit them or you.
Right. I've given myself enough, I think, at this point in my life. I've given myself enough. I've given enough free information. And what I've learned when I've given free information to people, whether I be at a conference, whether I be out at a concert, whether I be at a coffee shop, when I give free information, it's in one ear and out the other.
I agree.
Every time.
Yeah, they don't value it. People don't value free, do they?
No, they don't value free. So I can give you something for free on my website, but I can guarantee you that if you want the good stuff, you're going to have to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's just how it's going to be.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. So you coaching podcast players, and also I see that you're producing or doing the sound audio on a couple of podcasts. Talk about what services you offer to podcasters and who your ideal client is.
Right. So the ideal client is going to be a business owner, really. It's a business owner because they're serious about the development of their podcast, knowing that a podcast is an ongoing venture that can either generate leads for themselves, but it's not just a lead generator. It is genuinely giving their information out to the public, helping their core audience, their target market. That's the business owner that I'm looking. I'm looking for that business owner. Now, if you're a hobbyist, great. But maybe you're a hobbyist who has aspirations to turn it into a business. Yeah. I may look, but I'm not going to bite right away because I need to see that you are taking steps.
Okay.
To doing this, you're taking steps to grow it into something else. So to answer the other part of your question, so that's the person I'm looking for. The sound design and the structure of the podcast and helping podcasters know that podcasting just isn't it isn't this medium where you just go and you talk. Like it's 1 hour and it goes away. To me, I believe that when you go into a Best Buy or you go into a market, a grocery store, you go into anywhere, people, how many times can you tell me are you being upsold to get something or to donate to something?
Yeah.
That is something that I believe is just part of the marketplace that we are in. We're being upsold on everything. So I teach podcasters that your podcast isn't a podcast, but it is also a business driving machine. It's not only B2B, but it's also B2C. These work both ways. So for an example of B2B, if you are a podcaster, you have this opportunity to monetize a podcast. And when you hear monetization all over the place with other podcasters, you've probably heard it maybe with Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, all these guys, and they talk about this monetization model that they are using.
Yeah.
And that's what works for them. It truly does. That's what works for them. When I was out at Podcast Movement back in August of 2017, I ran into an old radio colleague of mine who works on the Tom Leykis show. I don't know if your audience is familiar with Tom Leykis. Yeah, and Tom was big in the radio space for many years. Howard Stern used to say that he was hawking his content and using it for Tom's show and all this. Anyway, so Tom was let go from radio for a certain amount of years. He was on contract, and while he was doing that, he decided to build an online platform for himself where he could still broadcast. In the beginning, it started out, of course, you're going to take losses, I'm sure, when it comes down to that. But as I was able to sit down with Tom, my buddy got me to sit down with Tom, and I asked Tom, hey, what is this model that you're using? He's like, I'm doing it basically just like radio. He goes, I monetize my podcast or my online show just like radio. There is no secret behind this. If your audience is invested in you and they are invested in what you provide to them, you're going to be able to monetize your podcast, whether that be through ads, whether that be through experience packages, whether that be through product. Monetization just doesn't mean like I'm going to make money off the podcast through ads. There's a whole circle of things that you can do to monetize your podcast because you're driving traffic to different areas where you want people to buy your product, services, or otherwise.
So you help your clients kind of expand their mind and expand what's potentially possible. Sounds like.
Exactly. So when you think about it and you think about Facebook ads and you think about seeing Facebook ads up onto your in the feed, well, you're paying, pennies on the dollar for a video ad, and you're paying maybe $1 for, a still ad or a link or anything like that. Same concept with radio or with podcasting. You can do the same thing. There's been this discussion about whether or not ads work or don't work in the space. And I just did a video on my YouTube channel that talks about that, whether or not you should, whether or not this is an effective model. And the research that has come back from, I believe, Nielsen Ratings is saying that, ad placement in your podcast, it really doesn't affect the listener because it exposes them or it makes them aware of a brand that your podcast really believes in. You're just not going out and getting any support or any type of sponsor. You as the podcaster are getting someone who is that is a product that you believe in. So let's say you are a big believer in FreshBooks. I'm not personally I'm not a FreshBooks person, but let's say you are into FreshBooks and that is someone you have reached out to and you said, I want to promote your podcast or promote your product, with affiliate links and whatever, or maybe we work out a deal where you pay a certain amount of money per month, and let's go really, really low, just to give you an example. Let's say it's like, hey, $5 a podcast, you get placement in a certain area on my podcast, whether it be through an endorsement, whether it be through a recorded ad, whether it be the pre-roll, however, and I'll give you a value add on my website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can do that for local businesses as well. So it seems as though podcasters aren't looking to these types of monetization. There are a few of them that are out there that are really good, that have been in the marketing game and that have played in the radio space before, but not everyone's doing that. Not all podcasters are doing that. And it's just a matter of educating these podcasters on that model to get them set up for monetization. There's a guide on my site that talks all about this. It's complete, I talk mostly about how that story with Tom Likas and how he told me how he monetizes his podcast.
And I was going to ask you, and so obviously I'm assuming that works very well for him, his plan and his model.
Yes, it works. And it works for him because he already had an audience. Now, I know the question is being asked probably by your audience right now is that, well, what if I don't have an audience? Then you got to start thinking about, well, what is it that you offer and how can you give back to the world? Because he came from traditional radio where he based his show on the comedy humor. You could say, I know he
was big in the pickup scene, wasn't he? Wasn't he kind of, I guess a player, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, just a player. I mean, he was, basically just
kind of like a Howard Stern, right?
Yeah, I mean, like a Howard Stern. But when you really dig deep down about Likas, is that when you tuned into his show, he was harvesting individuals. I mean, for lack of a better term, but he was harvesting individuals on how to get laid.
Yeah,
He was teaching
kind of a little bit of personal development, a little bit of game pickup, getting laid, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, that's what he offered to his audience. So he was teaching them how to play the game.
Yeah.
And so that's what his audience found value in. So even though it seemed funny and he joked around and he put all these little elements into his radio program, he brought that over into online. It still worked because he was still
doing online.
He's still doing online out of Burbank. Yeah.
Okay. So he had a little hiatus from his radio days, little hiatus, and he launched his online career, and he's going to town on it. Sounds like.
Yeah. I don't think it's any secret with his audience, but when I had talked with him when I was in Burbank last year, he had said that last year, he netted, I believe, something like $1 million just off of his program. And that was based off of all the elements that he had created, that he has built for himself. So again, when you come back to, hey, the average podcaster, how do I even get to that level? I don't even have an audience yet. Those are the elements where you have to ask yourself, what am I offering to the audience? What am I giving to my audience? And am I being genuine with my audience? So if you're a player like Tom and you want to offer, hey, I want to keep my money and I want to play girls all day long. And I want, not that he's completely like that, but, generalistically, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get someone who is saving their money, but knows how to play the game with women and knows how to live life this way. But let's take it to the other extreme. Maybe it has to deal with something that's more holistic, or maybe it's something that's a little more, maybe we're talking more about a podcast that's like about religion. What are you still offering to your audience? What can you give to your audience that talks about religion? Same thing could be said for politics. Same thing could be said for health. Same thing could be any niche that you want to pick. You have to figure out what is it that you're giving to them that they can take away and find value in, so that they can come back and say, he gives a lot of great value out of his podcast. That's something that you could take to an advertiser and say, look, these are how many downloads I'm getting because these people listen to what I have to say.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a good point you bring that up. I know in my own experience, I love talking about personal development and spiritual development. And so I built a kind of a passion business around that. But eventually, and this is something that's kind of always unfolding on my own journey, it comes back to, how can I be more valuable to more people more often? I find that I focus more on them and their needs as on me and sharing my passion. Is that what you found in your journey, or?
Yeah, I think that's the common theme that you'll hear from most people, is that once you have focused on that one thing, that you're real passionate about, and you continue to just hammer away at it every day, and you're just hammering and you're working it out to the point to where that's what you're known for. That's who people are going to come to. They're going to come to you because you know the most about it. So if you're big into Los Angeles Lakers basketball and that's all you can think about, and that's all you know, and you know every stat, and you know every player, and you know every retired player, and you know every number, and like people will just be like, oh, that dude's the Laker guy.
Yeah, I'm continually blown away by these, niche businesses that are just blowing up and being super successful off. I saw one the other day on related to Printful, and someone has started a poster and shirt business by putting the graphic representation of these amazing plays in football, basketball, whatever, on the t-shirts and posters, and just blowing up.
That's amazing.
It's so cool to see people, taking something that they love and making a viable business out of it.
Yeah. And, honestly, all it takes, Mark, is it just takes that step. And that step is just deciding whether you want to get off the couch from Netflix and watching Game of Thrones to going into your office, sitting down, opening up your laptop, and taking that first step to researching and deciding that you want to make something that's going to affect the world. That's it. I
agree. Yeah, I totally agree. And I bring up Seth Godin again because he's one of my heroes of late, and he says that exact same thing. He says, "Hey, you don't need more time, you don't need more information, you just need to decide."
Yeah, it's just like making one decision can change the outcome of your entire life. That's all it is. Making one decision. And if you are, something that I'm very big on is intention every day. You could say, some people could say that I'm religious. Some could say that I'm, spiritual. I consider myself more of a spiritual person. I sit and I give intention to everything that I do every day, even on my lowest days. This past week has been a very low week for me, but I know that with intention, sitting down and, with a hot meal in front of me that I made over the stove and giving thanks to, you could call it God, you could call it, Allah, you can call it the universe, whatever. For me, I give thanks to the universe for the nutrients that I'm going to put into my body, and the ability to have it make me feel better and not feel sick, and make me feel nourished and live with vitality throughout the day. And knowing that every step that I take after that meal is going to help me accomplish the goal of helping others down the line so that they can achieve their goals. So it starts at a very granular level when you come down to it. It starts with me, it starts in the kitchen, and then it works its way up into all the other habits that encompass my life. Wow, I really love that. And I can tell that that is, on one hand, very fundamental and foundational, but on the other hand, super profound. I can imagine that you're sowing and reaping a lot of big benefits from doing those practices. Yeah, those are huge practices. They are just habits. They're daily habits. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would have. I smoked. I drank. I never did drugs. But I smoked and I drank, and and I was playing around the field a lot. Having unprotected sex. Just all these things. And then you look at me now, and it's just like, no, I'm a way different individual. I'm the same person. I'm the same person ultimately. Right. Well, but I imagine being in, from what I know about being a radio DJ, it's like, at least it looks like a lot of quote unquote type of partying. You're out on live events with rock bands and stuff. I mean, did that precipitate some of that behavior, or? Yeah, I think it was in my mind back then that if rock stardom is high school, radio is junior high. Oh, really? And it was preparing me for like rock stardom, really. Yeah. There may be some radio DJs out there that disagree with me, but when you look at it, it was like, go out, party, live the life, be the life. But then I started looking at guys like Dave Grohl, and he's just like, no, I'm just being me. Sure. I may drink every now and again, but I also have kids. Yeah. And yeah, I read that. I read something about Adam Levine. The other day, he said he lives pretty clean, but occasionally he's going to have a drink and get drunk. Yeah. I mean, I don't see a reason why you can't live your life. There's a difference between binging and having a nice, having a beer with a burger every now and again. Like, there's a difference. There's a wild contrast with that, because going out to drink just to get drunk, that's an addiction. That's a habit that you've built. And that habit leads to waking up late, which is a habit, which leads to not making your bed, which is a habit, which leads to eating Cheerios or Lucky Charms for breakfast, lunch, and dinner,
Totally.
because these are all the things that I did.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And then, like you say, I mean, once you get the diet off the table and aren't eating the good foods, everything else just falls down, doesn't it?
Yeah. It just it goes back to the beginning part of the conversation, is that you tear yourself down so much in terms of tear yourself down in the bad parts of yourself. You shed yourself of that skin, that you start to discover this brand new individual who really values who they are and values their time and values what they're putting out into the world. And it's the law of sowing or reaping. You reap what you sow. So if you're going to put those things in your life, you're going to receive equally as good things.
Absolutely. So true. So true. So tell us about your podcast, your Be the Experience.
Right. So Be the Experience was spawned out of the idea, of course, to start the YouTube channel. And I had gone to a conference, so that's 2017. So back in 2016, I went to a conference, Jeff Walker conference. I don't know if any of your audience members know who Jeff Walker is, but he's the big guy in the product launch strategy.
Yeah.
And at that conference, I had run into Shalane Johnson, who is one of my coaches. And I jumped into her Marketing Impact Academy. And a lot of what was already in her academy was something that I had known. I had already known a lot about what was going on in Marketing Impact Academy. What it was, the key difference, the catalyst of it was the decision that I had to make. So I needed to decide on what I was going to create, because she wants you to create a product.
Okay.
And so I hemmed and I hawed for a good 6 months, tried to figure out a product. I built my first product. It was based off of Facebook Live, how to do a Facebook Live. And this is when Facebook Live was just becoming a big thing. And I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to be able to keep up with this platform, because Facebook's updating Facebook Live every day.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I kept that course, and I had made some sales off of it, but I still needed to decide what it was. So this all comes back to the podcast. So I remember I was confused by the end of December of 2016. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was on the verge of quitting completely and just being like, I'll go get a job at T-Mobile.
Yeah, sometimes it gets that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and you're just like, I'll just go get a job and sell phones. That's all I'll do. And I had a friend of mine who said, hey, let's go out and let's hike the Superstition Mountains out here in Phoenix. And I said, okay, yeah, sure. So at this time I had been going out and I had been hiking quite a bit, and I had been doing a lot of self-reflecting, meditating on the mountain. And at that particular time when I went out with her, we were talking about our businesses. And so she owns a business where she is a mermaid. She plays a mermaid in the summer, and she does parties.
Oh, wow.
And she was telling me about her business. And then she was like, you're so amazing, Shannon. I don't know why you don't just do this on YouTube. Look at this channel that this guy does. This is what he talks about. And she showed me like all these videos, and not to get too in depth or detail, but he has videos on there on how to, just about how to do anything really, from charming a woman all the way to reading 3 books in a week. It's just like it's just amazing, like what this guy was doing. And so I thought to myself, yeah, I could do that. So that was at the very beginning of January. And when I got home, I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, I need to start putting this plan in place. And I said, if I'm going to create YouTube videos, I need to have a podcast. That's just what it is. I need to have a podcast. I need to live what it is. Okay, so that's a long story, long answer. So then I said, well, what is it that I am passionate about? And what is something that I keep telling people that they need to do whenever they go out and they do these? They want to live their best life, and they want to live this enriched life filled with vitality. And I kept telling them, if you want to be like what the rock stars are doing up on stage, they're creating an experience for you. They're creating that experience to make you live an enriched life, but they're equally as enriched because they're creating experiences. They're creating something that they don't have to get asked for anymore. They're just doing it because you're paying the $70 ticket to go see Dave Grohl get up on stage and run around all over the place. He creates such an amazing experience for him to come down into the crowd, and he happens to talk to you. That was probably well worth the $70 ticket. So that's where Be the Experience was spawned out of. And I thought, well, if I'm doing this on the radio, I should start expressing this idea to people. But where did it start? Where does it start? And the very first episode of my podcast, it focuses on, this conversation that you and I are basically having, going back down to the fundamentals of, if I'm going to do something and I'm going to commit to that thing, I need to focus on my health. And the first guest that I had on with me was a guy named Rob Rivera. He was the drummer of a band called Nonpoint. And I had seen him on Instagram, and we had known each other, and but we're not close. I mean, we're acquaintances. And I'd seen that he had lost a bunch of weight, and I was like, wow. And he was talking about it. And typically, I've noticed that when people lose a bunch of weight, they do a lot of self-reflection on Instagram and Facebook.
You got to show it off, right?
Yeah, and show it off. And I see that as a good thing, because you really get a perspective, and it's kind of like that's your journal in time that you get to see back. And so I asked him, I said, hey man, when you come through Phoenix, can I get an interview with you and talk about how you reversed your diabetes, type 2 diabetes? And he goes, yeah, sure, man, let's do it. So I made it a point to get my phone, and I was using that as my microphone because I wanted it to be as raw and as real as possible to gain that experience that people are getting there, like they're actually backstage at a show, listening to the drums in the background and all the action happening in the background, but also focusing on the parts of life that, hey, if this rock star can sit here and be honest with me and tell me that it's no longer about eating biscuits and gravy every day and sucking down beers all day long and indulging in the lifestyle of rock stardom, but really how to rock is to drink juice and eat your vegetables and go for a walk every day and to live with intention and to still get up on stage and give an experience, I'll take it, So that's where the premise started. And so it starts from the very beginning of like, hey, let's focus on our health and nutrition. And I take it all the way back. I take it 12 episodes all the way to the journey that I think we all experience when it comes down to health and nutrition and fixing ourselves, is that there are ups and downs, and there are ups and downs, and there are moments of self-reflection. And there's these interviews I have an interview with a friend of mine, Jason Richardson, who's a certified psychologist and clinical psychologist. And he talks about these ideas of making decisions and how everything that we say feeds into our subconscious. And when we say everyday things in our lives, that feeds into our subconscious, and that determines the outcome of our reality. And that's why, I wanted to dive into that. And not only did I want to dive into professionals in their field of, say, psychology or counseling or whatever, but I also wanted to take it to the other extreme and interview the everyday person. And so like the last interview that I have is with my friend Stephanie Peets, and she rides motorcycles. She races them. And that seems to be the episode that everyone loves because it's such a raw interview from both of us. But in that time, you get to hear the story that I'm telling based off of the experience that I was going through at the time. Especially at that time, I was experiencing serious sciatic pain because I was going through and editing this podcast, and it was wildly cathartic. And by the end of it, it was like there was this big release, and I had to realize that there are pieces of my life that I have to let go. And it was a big learning experience for me. But someone just the other day came up to me and they listened to that final episode, and he was a man. He was like, I almost cried during that interview. He's like, on so many different levels. I'm not going to spoil it for anyone, but if you go and you listen to it, there's just so many different levels of emotion that go into that podcast. And that's what you experience when you're going through on the road to personal development.
Wow. And so, okay, so a couple of things. So speaking about how we can get your podcast now, it seems like in the past you're on, I know you have your website, but it's tried to get it before. Do you have to be joined to your community to get your podcasts, or how can we listen?
No, you can actually listen to it online, on Stitcher, on iTunes. You can listen to it on Google Play. There is an ad-supported version, and then there's the ad-free version. I've recently pulled the ad-free version down because I'm reworking on that. But you can still listen to it on iTunes. It's just loaded with ads. That's the only difference.
That must have been what I saw initially. And I've just clicked away for the moment. But I'm going to go and check it out, especially so this last episode. So are you saying that like during the either the episode or the editing that you think you like released some emotional baggage of some degree through your body and through your sciatic nerve in a sense?
Yeah, I believe that there was part of that. I experienced it a couple of other times. I experienced it when I lost 27 pounds. I experienced it when I tested my physical limits and endurance one time when I was exercising on an arc trainer, and I was like hustling, and I think I burned something like 1,000 calories in like almost less than an hour. And and just hustling, and I had, each one of those moments I came out of it and I cried, and I found that moment was the moment where I said, well, I don't have to live with that past anymore. I can create a new future. And when it came to that podcast, I still was living with this idea of expectation romantically with how I was putting myself out there with women. And there was a woman in my life at the time that I had romantic interest in, and there were mixed signals that I was gaining. And that played a significant part in it because that's what you're hearing in that podcast. I tell you exactly in that podcast that I had a recent fallout with someone who I was trying to be romantic with. Uh-huh. And reflectively, when it came back, I had realized that I was setting expectations that were unreal for me, and not staying true to myself. I shouldn't say that you shouldn't let your guard down, but I let my guard down too much. Mm-hmm. And the mixed signals confused me. And so then it was a really good lesson for me to say like, oh, if someone, it goes back to like the business part. If you want to pick my brain, it's going to be $125 an hour to meet with me. But if you want to be with me in a romantic relationship, there's a whole different set of rules that have value on top of that.
Yeah.
So now I've become more choosy, and people say like, oh, don't be choosy. I'm like, no, man, I am not settling for someone who's going to disappoint me down the line.
Well, yeah, you value yourself more to allow that to happen.
Right. It's all about valuing yourself. So that final podcast, you'll hear a lot of catharsis in the description and in the actual interview itself, especially with Stephanie, because she breaks down in that podcast itself. And there's just so much emotion in that podcast that I remember when I'm
going to go check it out. Yeah. Cause I think I saw the reference to it come through on your Instagram page. And of course I've been to your website a number of times. So I'll definitely go check that out.
Yeah, definitely check it out.
What about the future for the podcast? What do you have planned for, moving forward? Where are you going to focus?
I think it's going to still go down that line of, personal development, helping people understand from the perspective of a rock star, that you don't have to party hard in order to be successful, that, you will experience ups and downs. I have these interviews that I've had, I want to release a new season, but I realize that I can't release a new season until, I have some clients under my belt that I'm working with, because if you're just doing a podcast, you're doing a podcast as a hobby, and it's just going to cost you money.
Right. So you got to balance that out. Right. And I totally get that.
Yeah. So the upcoming season that I want to create really focuses on that path that after you shed your skin, the self-discovery of where you find that not comfort zone, but where you find that you can fit into the world and add value. I have these great interviews with, her name is Carla Harvey. She used to be a Playboy model, and she's now in this band called Butcher Babies. And you would think, oh, Playboy model sings in a rock, hard rock band, but she's also a counselor on the side.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so there are these awesome contrasts with some of these people. You know, there's this guy named Jamie Josta. He's in a band called Hatebreed. And, you know, he talks, you know, everything about his music is so aggressive. But when you sit down and you talk with him, he's like, oh, yeah, man. He's like, this is all about personal development. This is all about becoming the best person and best version of yourself, and you supporting as many people as you want. I mean, these interviews are wildly different from what you typically hear.
Oh, I love that. And you get to show people the other side of these individuals.
Yeah. So that's the goal. It's really kind of the goal, is to show the other side, because behind everything that you see on the front, there's always a meaning behind it. There's a reason why they're doing it.
Yeah, well, and I really love the fact that, you know, the core of your show and the foundation of it is this, you know, giving people an experience, because, you know, studying the marketing and advertising and stuff like that on my own, I do find that, just like you said, these people are performing, they're giving you an experience, and they may be very different off stage than they appear to be on stage.
Right. I think 90% of what you're doing off stage affects the 10% of what you're doing on stage. That's just not for musicians. That's for businesses. That's for podcasters. What you do off the air, what you do off the microphone affects directly to what you're doing on the microphone. And it shows. I can tell. I can typically tell when someone hasn't done their homework. Yeah,
totally. I can certainly understand that. Well, Shannon, I appreciate you spending some time with me today and sharing what you're doing in your journey. And I look forward to catching up with you down the road here and checking out your stuff.
No, Mark, I appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun. I mean, I hope I didn't ramble too much.
No, this is all solid gold. Like I said, you've been on my short list of people to reach out to for about 5 or 6 months. But like you said, you know, juggling things, getting things in line, getting ready to roll takes a little bit of behind the scenes work. So I appreciate you taking your time to share your story. I love it.
Not a problem, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you, Shannon. Well, what'd you think? Did you get some value out of that interview? Hopefully you did. And before I let you go, I just want to share how you can get in touch with Shannon Hernandez and listen to his podcast. So you can find him online at theshanman.com. That's TheShanman.com. That's his website. You can also listen to his podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Podbean, and it's titled Be the Experience. It's an amazing interview-based podcast, and it's seasonal-based. So there's not necessarily a weekly podcast coming out, but it does block by season. So just keep that in mind when you go check it out. Also, you can catch him on YouTube making amazingly helpful videos for entrepreneurs just like you, helping you share your message with the world. And I'll put links to all of those on my website, gmarkphillips.com. All right, that's the show. As always, I really want to thank you for tuning in. I do appreciate it. And until next time, all the best, health, wealth, and success. Bye-bye.